Oh, hey YouTube. Welcome to my kitchen again. I thought maybe we could pour a glass of bubbly together to celebrate the first seeds of the season being planted. And I wanted to share with you guys what I'm doing this year and how I'm doing some things very differently than I've done in the past. Ooh, that's pretty. That's pink.
Before we dive into life in the cottage, I'd love to extend a heartfelt thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Not only does Squarespace support creatives like me who make a video for a living, but they also make it easy and possible for other creatives or anyone looking to start a website to get their message out into the world, just like I have used their service for Homemaker Chic podcast. Squarespace makes it easy to connect social media accounts and automatically push out website content. Visit squarespace.com/Elliott Homestead for a free trial and to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain.
We're changing things up quite a bit this year because last year, dare I say, the gardens got the better of me. I've shared that with you guys in talking about how we're going to plan for next year's garden and how we're just sort of implementing some new systems. And seed starting was actually a big part of that. So I'd also like to say a gigantic cheers to Charles Dowding, who I have been binging here on YouTube for the last few months. I have fallen asleep to his voice, I think, almost every night since Christmas. And I've learned a ton. And even though Charles gardens in a little bit of a different zone than I do, he's in Britain, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot that I could take from his videos. And I want to share some of that with you because I'm really hopeful about what this will mean for the ease of how we're able to go about our garden work this year. So if you're brand new to gardening, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? Like, don't you garden the same? Don't you just put seeds in the ground and water them and keep the weeds away and let them grow? And to that, yes, you do, but there are different ways of going about that. And so Charles' method that he's really become famous for is called the no-dig method. The idea being that you disturb the soil just as little as possible. Because every time you disturb it or every time you till it, you till weed seeds in as well. And so there's this beautiful soil web of fungus and worms and all kinds of bacteria that lives underneath our soil. So Charles's theory is the least you can disturb that, the better. And you know what? I have nothing to lose because all the systems that I have tried in the past really have failed in terms of maintaining the garden. Now, I have a gigantic flower garden outside my house. I also have a gigantic vegetable garden up by the barn here on our property. And so I garden both for pleasure of just the beautiful aesthetics of flowers. And I also garden with a purpose, which is to harvest vegetables and food for our family. And so I am going to be implementing Charles's no-dig method in our brand new market garden because last year the weeds won and it completely took the joy out of gardening for me. And I gotta say, this year in starting our seeds, the joy is already restored a lot. And I'm gonna share with you why that is. So one of the resources that I got is Charles's calendar. So he's in zone 8, technically. He's kind of making that up because Britain doesn't have the same zones that we do here in the United States. I'm zone 7B. So the dates are a little bit different. But what he's done, and there's a million different resources from this that you can get online, but he's just made a calendar and said, hey, on this day, remember to plant this vegetable. And the benefit of that is that he reminds you to succession plant. This is not something I've been good at all in the past. I plant everything once and then I don't plant it again. So I have, 30 feet of arugula ready all at the same time, which we don't need because we're not selling it anywhere. We can't even eat it that fast. So what happens is a lot goes to waste and you have a shorter period of harvest. So what Charles is encouraging people to do is to plant a little bit on this day, then a little bit 2 weeks later, then a little bit 2 weeks later, and it extends your season of harvest for a really long time. So let's talk about what is going into the soil right now. So if you're brand new to gardening, there's something that you should know about vegetables, and that is they all require different things to grow well. So when I first did my very first garden, I put all the seeds in the ground at the same time and was like, good luck. So the radish were planted right alongside the peppers, right alongside the tomatoes and the beans and the zucchini. But that's not the way that it should be done. There are cold season vegetables or vegetables that you can start right now, at least in my zone. And then there are warm season vegetables, vegetables that like it when it's hot. And so those are kind of the two categories that I split them into. That being said, there are some hot season vegetables that we actually plant now because they take a really long time to grow. So peppers, for example, I will start in about a week, but I won't plant them out until the middle of May. So they have quite a long life here on the farm in their little containers before they actually get moved out. But then there's really quick vegetables, things like lettuce or arugula or peas that will just grow for a few weeks in their containers before being moved out into the garden. So let's talk about how that works. There are two new methods from Charles's teachings that I'm going to be implementing in the garden this year with the giant umbrella really of just ease. I want gardening to be easier so that I can enjoy it more and so that I want to spend more time out there. If you've had a big garden and it's become completely overgrown with weeds, you know that that's not very fun. Or, last year I've often complained about having to thin out carrots. So we grow in these big market rows, and to go out there and just, tediously go like this, it just takes a ton of time and it's really hard on your knees. And I want to enjoy it more. I don't want it to physically break me. So one of the big ways that we're going to be shifting the way we do systems this year is we're going to be sort of cluster planting, if you will. What is this right here in front of me? This is purple onion. Okay, so typically the way I've grown onions is I've grown them in long rows, 1 onion, 4 inches, 1 onion, 4 inches. And so I would grow my seed, I would pluck out all the teeny tiny little onions, and then I would transplant them out into the garden just one by one. And it's like planting microscopic blades of grass. It takes forever. It's one of the biggest tasks we have in the garden every year because we grow a lot of onions, around 700. I usually try to count for like 2 a day. So I guess that's almost 800 onions we grow every year. And so if you can imagine transplanting 800 little hairs, it takes a ton of time. So the way that we're countering that is we're going to be cluster planting. So if you see the way I'm planting these onions, I'm planting about 4 or 5 seeds in every cell of this cell tray. And what that's going to give me is a little cluster of onions. Then instead of transplanting every onion by itself, I can just take out the entire plug, which is way easier to handle, and transplant that into the garden as one whole clump. So this makes I'm already 5 times faster than I was because instead of transplanting 1, I'm transplanting 5 all at the same time. And then, of course, there's just the ease of you're not really disturbing the roots. They're just right here, pop out the plug and pop it in. So then, if you'd like, you can take a few onions. Once they start to grow, you can take a few out as spring onions, just like you would eat a normal scallion or a green onion. You can do that. But the great thing about onions is that they will grow outwards, just like radishes and beets and turnips will. And so if you plant a cluster, you'd think, oh, they're too crowded, they can't grow. But Charles's videos show that that's simply not the case because the onions will grow outward. They'll sort of just push each other away. And my farmer, or one of the farmers I know down the road, she grows her onions like this, and she can grow 3 times as many onions in the same amount of space as I can. So I'm really excited to try this method, and you can do it with a lot of other vegetables besides just onions. You can do this with beetroot. You can do this with radish. You can do this with turnips. I'll make a complete list below in the show notes if you want to check that out, but I'm starting a lot of vegetables this year by cluster planting. I'm also going to be doing a lot less direct sowing into the garden and a lot more of doing this in the greenhouse and getting these plugs going. The reason for that is we have a lot of critters around here that will scratch them up. Those pea shoots, like if you're trying to sprout peas out in our garden in the springtime, good luck because the quail devour them. And so when you get things started inside where it's safe and you can control the temperature and you can control what, gets to it, although a stray cat or a child might linger by and pick something off, but they have a much better chance at surviving than they would directly out into the garden. Like a lot of home gardeners, we don't have unlimited space. And so if there's any way that I can save on space in my greenhouse and in my kitchen, which is where I keep the seeds while they're germinating, then I'm going to do it. So another method that I'm going to be implementing this year is what Charles, what does he call it? I can't think what he calls it. But basically what he does, especially for seeds that can tend to have low germination or that you really want to pick the strongest seeds of, he plants them in small little containers just like this. So there's actually probably 100 seeds planted in this one little pot, which might sound kind of strange. But I have 3 different types of broccoli in here. And the seeds will sprout, and there will be really strong seeds and sort of weaker seeds. And so what I'm going to do after they sprout, and we'll be able to see them in their little lines here, is I will pluck them out. I will use a little tool. Charles just uses a pencil a lot of times, just a teeny little thing, plucks it out, and then he gets his cell tray just like this, filled with compost, just digs a little hole with a pencil or with his finger, drops the transplant in, buries it nice and deep, and then tucks the soil in around it. And then he can select the biggest, strongest, healthiest plants. If you've ever germinated cells in a tray like this, you know that the corners tend not to germinate well because they tend to be the driest because they often just kick up a bit out of the watering tray. You'll have seeds that don't germinate, so you end up with a lot of empty cells. And so this is his way of ensuring that when he has a flat of plants, all the cells are full, all the plants are healthy, and then he can account for that when he moves them out into the garden. And so there's quite a few, all of our cabbages, all of our broccolis, cauliflowers, we all started this way. The ones that I didn't start this way are ones where I cluster planted. So where I put 5 or 6 seeds in, if 1 or 2 of those seeds doesn't germinate, it's not going to ruin the cluster. And so my beetroots, my onions, my radishes, those were all started in plug trays. And all the things I really need individual strong plants of, like lettuces or broccoli, I started in these small little ones. So it'll probably only take them about 2 weeks before they germinate and I can see which ones I want to keep. And as long as you're careful and you pick them up very carefully by their leaves and not by their stems and just work daintily with them, you can transplant them into the plug tray with no problem. One of the things that I'm really trying to stick with this year is keeping track of when I plant things, simply so I don't have to think about it again next year and the year after. Because every year I'm trying to do math in my head, like what's 8 weeks? What's 12 weeks? So our last frost tends to be the first week of May. Our first frost tends to be the first week of October where I am. And that's pretty close to when Charles's is. So I'm going by Charles's is. So I'm going by his for the most part and just pushing it back about 5 or 6 days. So here's what I've got planted so far. Spring onion, lettuce, spinach, coriander, cabbage, arugula, cauliflower, artichokes, broccoli, fava beans, parsley, radish, beets, and leeks. All of these seeds have just been started in an organic compost. I use black gold. I've had really good results with it. So for now, all the seeds are just hanging out in my warm kitchen. They'll be here. You can see I've just stacked them up over there against the wall. They don't need light right now. They're all watered. They're all very happy tucked into the soil. And once they start to germinate, the cold vegetables like leeks and onions and cabbages and broccoli, those can all go out to my unheated greenhouse and they can just hang out there all through the spring while they'll get a ton of sunlight. The warmer season vegetables that we're going to be planting, such as peppers and eggplant, we'll do those next week, but those will need to stay inside for the remainder of spring until it's safe for them to go outside without the risk of frost. So here is my encouragement to you. Don't think that you're stuck to one system or another. Find a way of gardening that feels good for you, that makes it possible for you, that makes you still enjoy what you're doing out there. I'm really going into this season. I know this is like the gardener's Achilles heel, but I'm going into this season with a ton of hope and thinking this might actually eliminate a lot of work for us out in the vegetable garden, which means we can enjoy the harvest and preserving and the flower gardens all the more. So happy gardening, get some seeds in the ground, and we'll see you next week.